Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan, and I'm absolutely delighted and honored to have a very old friend, colleague, and mentor agree to do this Zoom with me, Dr. Alan Scheflin. Alan, thank you so much. I want to just sing your praises for a couple more minutes and say that you are a law professor emeritus from Santa Clara Law School. You not only have expertise as a lawyer, but you also have a master's in counseling psychology. You're also an expert on hypnosis. And I also wanted to say I first became introduced to you through this 1978 book, The Mind Manipulators, based on your research on MK Ultra and CIA mind control research, which you were fascinated with. And over the decades, you've done a tremendous amount of important work. Here's one of the volumes you co-authored, Memory, Trauma, Treatment, and the Law, that won a very prestigious Guttmacher Award. It's very substantial and, in my opinion, the state of the art for understanding memory, trauma, treatment, and the law. And then lastly, another book that won the prestigious Guttmacher Award, Trance on Trial, about hypnosis and the legal system. And now that I've plugged three of your many publications and journal articles, I want to especially thank you for your social influence model, which was a feature of my doctoral dissertation as a framework for judges and juries to better understand the issue of undue influence. And with that as the intro, please take it away. What would you like to share with us, please?
Before I talk about the sim, I wanted to go back in time a bit to explain how I arrived at it. And the story begins perhaps my first time testifying in court. It was a case involving overcrowding in California prisons, with the plaintiffs' prisoners saying that three people in the cell that they had, the size of the cell was clearly overcrowding because that you could barely move around. To make their point, they constructed a full-size jail cell in the courtroom with, interestingly enough, the door to the cell opening to the judge's seat. So when the judge looked at it, it was an invitation to walk in, which I think was more compelling also. But what I realized is that you could talk about a jail cell and you could talk about the size of it. But if you actually saw the jail cell as it had been reproduced in the courtroom, that made the point that 100,000 words would not have made.
Hmm.
That led me to the notion of demonstrative evidence, as it's called. And one of the champions, if not the initiator of demonstrative evidence, was a lawyer named Melvin Belli from California. And he did a lot of work, a lot of cases, was a high visibility character, a delightful human being. Um, and I learned from him about demonstrative evidence. He learned by being at San Quentin prison and talking to the warden. And the warden showed him all of the weapons that prisoners had. And Belli said, when I saw those weapons, if he said they had shivs and knives and so on, it would have just rolled off in my head. But when I saw these lethal weapons, that really made a point that words would not have been as effective in describing. And so demonstrative evidence is now part of the universe in law. And what more immediately led me to the idea of the sim in court was testifying in a case in Texas with multiple issues involved, multiple characters, and a lot of tough legal questions. I went down and I met with the lawyer, a wonderful woman, uh, and explained all of the details and what the case involved and who the characters were and so forth. And she absorbed all of that. And the next morning, working overnight, she produced a big chart, uh, multiple dimensions, multiple colors, and everything was laid out. And I thought, well, if you tried to explain what was on that chart to a jury, it would take a long time and they would have brain freeze. But there it was, multicolored, um, laid out in a way that could effectively be grasped visually in a moment. Okay. Now, the social influence model was created to be among other things, a visual representation of what the case involved. And the case involved what we used to call brainwashing or mind control or thought reform. Um, but those cases didn't fare all that well in courts because judges says, this is a law court. We need legal theory. Brainwashing isn't a legal theory. Thought reform isn't a legal theory. Um, bring me a legal theory. And so I thought about that and I said, yes, we can't use these words in court. Let's give them a legal theory that they cannot object to because it's been in the law for hundreds of years, and it's called undue influence. Undue influence began as a way in which people at death had been bilked out of their life savings by normally a custodian who had those last moments with them and essentially suggested, why leave all your money to your family if you could leave it to me? And so the court said, no, that's absolutely wrong. You can't do that. And undue influence was created as a legal theory. So you can go into court and say, this is the legal theory we are proceeding on. And then you needed to just prove what had happened and you could get relief.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed to me that the only thing that stood in the way of using the undue influence idea in cases involving not physical incapacitation and death, but involving mental subservience would be that the old undue influence tort did not generally address damages for mental distress, only for what you lost. If somebody built money out of you, how much was it? Here, you'll get it back. So with that in mind, I wanted something that will simultaneously be available to help judges, to help courts, to help jurors, to help experts, to help victims. And the social influence model came from a poem by Rudyard Kipling. And I'll read the poem to you. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And I researched it and discovered that that poem was used by journalists to teach future journalists. If you want to write a compelling news story and really grab people's attention, hold their attention, and move them emotionally, you did it by who, what, why, where, when.
Right.
You put them in the place of that story.
Right.
And so that became my way of constructing what I call the social influence model. And the social influence model itself has 6 lines to it. One is the influencer.
Right.
This is the who. And the influencer is the person who has done the influence which is being complained about. So in the old days, with undue influence, it would be the person who bilked you out of the money, or the estate out of the money.
Hmm.
Who is that person? What do we know about them? Okay. Secondly,
So, for example, like an authority figure, like a priest or a teacher
exactly.
or
Yes.
therapist, they
Yes.
have more authority to influence a person.
And of course, with some of those instances, uh, a question of what's called fiduciary responsibility would apply as well,
Hmm.
because there are some people like your lawyer or your doctors who have a fiduciary duty to you, which is the highest duty known to law. They have to protect your interests even above their own. Those people tend to have more sway over people who are being influenced because of the social role or professional role they play.
Right. Thank you.
Uh, The second is the influencer's motives. This is the why. We know who the influencer is. Why did he or she do it? Well, usually it's financial gain. And that was pretty much the case in the old undue influence cases involving will probates and so on, but not anymore. It's to gain more than your money. It's to gain your identity and your mind, because people are more than the sum of the assets they've accumulated.
Right.
They are themselves an asset.
Right.
And,
Definitely.
and
I'd like to just add, if I may, Alan, for me,
absolutely.
working with authoritarian cults and cult leaders, it seems like the universal is power, money, and sex, and not always sex,
Right, right. And not
but
always money.
but power over.
Yes. Yeah. Because at some point, the money becomes more than you could ever spend in a lifetime.
Right.
And so the money stops being, if it ever was, the dominating influence on
Mm-hmm.
the influencer,
Mm-hmm.
but the power never goes away.
Right.
The sex is a byproduct to some extent, the way money is, but it's the power.
Yep. Of course, if there's a pimp or trafficker, then the slaves who work for free or do sex work for them is a way of getting money
Yes,
and power.
right, right.
Go on, please.
The third is the influencer's methods, and this is the what and the how. Now, what are influencers' methods? Some of them are well known. Have you ever picked up your telephone and somebody says, "Hello, how are you? My name is so and so, etc." And it suddenly starts dawning on you that this is a telemarketer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, "I'm sorry, I don't want to, I don't want to talk with you."
Right.
The answer you get is not, "Oh, okay." The answer is to keep you on the phone, to keep talking, to ask you something, often a question that you'll feel out of politeness compelled to answer, and to keep you on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of methods like that. There are methods that we can borrow from the awful case of child sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
The law calls it grooming.
Right.
You uh, befriend, shape, alter the perceptions of, and then the identity of
Mm-hmm.
the person you're grooming to do your bidding.
Right.
And much of that grooming is outside the awareness of the influencee, the victim.
Right. And people like Anthony Pratkanis and Robert Cialdini have written books on influence
Correct.
techniques and processes. And in my world and your world of cults and such, we've been using Robert Lifton's model, Margaret Singer's model, and now more recently the Bite model of authoritarian control,
Yes.
which I used your SIM model for my doctoral dissertation as a quantitative way to
Yes.
present all the different factors of
Now,
how the influence is being used.
and let me actually say one other thing about the influencers' methods. That part of the social influence model is where especially expert testimony is relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order to show how somebody can be manipulated, you have experts to explain the literature of manipulation and the instances of manipulation, how it works,
Right.
how many people fall for it. And without expert testimony, these cases are often very hard to win.
Right.
What makes experts happy about the social influence model is that they have a structure in which they can fit their theories and their data.
Right.
And what makes lawyers happy about it is this all then goes up on a chart. The social influence model is 6 parts. Each one is capable of a chart or a PowerPoint these days.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the jurors can see what you are saying. So you've got the ear and the eye. And if they space out for a while, as people will do, they still have the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So they've lost a little bit of information, but they haven't lost the context of it.
Right.
Uh, the fourth is circumstances, timing and setting. That's the where and when. Was this influence done in a dark room with the lights out and people standing over you, yelling at you, and so on?
Right.
Was it done in a crowd with a group of people? Was it done surrounded by other people who had been influenced, encouraging you to join them? Um, these circumstances, of course, play quite heavily into how effective or ineffective um, the techniques are and whether they're successful. The fifth element is the influencee's receptivity and vulnerability. We are obviously not all alike. Something that someone could say to you could bring tears to your eyes, and someone else will laugh at it.
Mm.
And so other people are very heavily influenced. Some people just distrust everything and are difficult
Right.
to influence. Now, again, these individual differences, as they're called in the law and in psychology, are the subject of various tests.
Mm-hmm.
You can use a battery of well-known instruments to see how receptive people is to suggestion. Some of these tests don't last more than 15 or 20 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and they're non-intrusive. It's not like getting a shot or
Mm-hmm.
any other physical encounter. Um, Once again, they get graphed.
Mm-hmm.
If you show that the person who had been influenced is very trusting, believes everybody is a good person, doesn't believe that anybody would really take advantage of him or her, that person can be more easily manipulated than somebody who doesn't trust anything unless they think it through and research it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The final six.
Can I just add in, if I
Sure.
may? So, with the influencee, I've always been aware of situational vulnerabilities, death of a loved one, illness, losing a job, graduating. Would
Right.
that be more under the circumstances or under the influencee in your thinking about the model?
Well, there's no hard line between the two. It's not as if they're distinct, because what you're dealing holistically with is an encounter, human to human.
Got it. Got it.
And
So,
so
yeah,
all of this does is tend to help clarify. Say you're a juror, what should I be looking for here?
right.
Well, the plaintiff is alleging to be a victim,
Mm-hmm.
um, alleging that the victim is in fact influenced by the defendant, who was the influencer.
Right.
Here's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Experts tell you what that means in terms of influence
Right.
and ability to sway people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
And the final one, the consequences, which is what in Kipling's poem,
Right.
what happened?
Right.
You know, you you now have no money, and the influencer has all of your money.
Right. Or you've dropped out of college, quit your job, donated your bank account, and went off to follow a Korean messiah like myself.
Yep. Or you're the eighth wife of the cult leader.
Right. Right. Um,
So this is all this. There's no technical jargon in any of
yes.
it, and it's structured to cover all of the dimensions. Uh, and if a juror has a question, well, what about in his or her mind? It's going to be in one of those categories.
Right. So if they're on the autism spectrum or hypnotizable or depressed or anxious or
Yeah.
sleep deprived, you can
Yeah.
fit that into the overall picture that
Yes.
you want to present.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's
But I
incredible.
also realized that there was another possibility, and that is the person who has been influenced, the influencee, um, is in pain. You know, they've been duped.
Mm. That's if they realize it.
And do they realize it? Can they fully accept it?
Yeah.
I, to some extent, I call this the myth of the unmalleable mind.
Please say more.
The general idea that, well, those other people are just fools.
The other people who get into authoritarian
Right.
cults, you mean?
Or anything else.
Yeah.
Yes. Or they weren't paying enough attention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Nobody could manipulate my mind. Yes, some of those guys are pretty clever out there, but I'm in control of my mind.
Yeah, cult recruiters, and I was one, can easily say to a 19-year-old, you're not going to let your parents control you. If you want to come to the workshop, you can come, right?
That's right.
That sort of thing. You're not afraid of being brainwashed because you're a strong minded person and you
That's right.
could walk out at any time, right?
That's right.
And the person goes, yup.
Yep. And unfortunately, the myth of the unmalleable mind tends to require a person to spend a longer amount of time understanding what has happened to them,
Yeah,
because the myth of the unmalleable mind, which is not generally conscious, it's a
right,
belief that you have that you ever hardly need to use,
right.
because you never think anybody's influencing you.
Right. I was absolutely sure in my deprogramming I hadn't been brainwashed, that I made my own decisions, and that God was with me, and that I'd go back to the group after the deprogramming time period elapsed. And
That's right.
and then I woke up and went, wait a minute. If I
Yeah.
go back in time, what did I think I was getting into?
Right.
And they said it wasn't religious. But now I'm bowing to an altar with Moon's picture on it and
Yes.
thinking democracy is satanic and fasting for Nixon during Watergate because Moon, for God, told me to.
Yes.
But at the time, I had no awareness of this.
And this is what marketers call a foot in the door technique.
Mm-hmm.
You get a little commitment, usually fairly neutral,
Mm-hmm.
and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and suddenly the foot has opened the door,
Yeah.
and then the whole person, including both feet, are in the house, and you don't notice those changes because the who that you were is changed with each step.
Yeah, in my case, I knew that I had changed, but I misattributed it to a divine spiritual source rather than, Chinese communist brainwashing techniques, which I later learned in my deprogramming about
Yeah.
of Lifton and Singer's research. But you don't know what you don't know. And I think your point about the myth of the invulnerable mind is so important.
Unmalleable.
I'm sorry, unmalleable mind, because it could never happen to me. It's only those weak people, those stupid people, blah, 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 instead of realizing we're human beings and we're
Yes.
wired to be influenced.
And also it's an embarrassment because
Yeah.
you feel guilty. How could I have fallen for that?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
you don't
Shame.
know that you're not alone.
Shame, embarrassment,
Yep.
and the
Yep.
whole ego gets in the way of it couldn't happen to me.
Right.
Oops, it did happen to me. Now what do I do with it?
Well, you have two or three choices. One is to say, "Oh well, I'll be wiser the next time."
Yep.
Another is to say, "Well, that really makes me angry. Um, I hope they stop those people."
Right.
The other is to feel sorry for yourself the rest of your life.
Right.
But one is to say, I got smacked in the face and I'm going to punch back
Right.
and do it legally.
Yeah, that's me. I'm a fighter.
Yep.
That was my coping strategy. Was I really wanted to understand what happened to me, what made me recruit so many people in and indoctrinate them and cut them
Yep.
off from their families and drop out of school. So
Well,
it's been an interesting journey for
yeah.
sure.
And I have enormous respect for you because you are truly a warrior of the mind.
Mm,
You are one of you have the sort of mental freedom.
mm,
You could have easily just told people about your experiences and done nothing. You could easily have told nobody about your experiences because you were too ashamed and then gone on with the rest of your life.
hmm.
But you did the most heroic and the most dangerous thing.
Yeah,
You
thank
said, I'm not only going to fight back personally, I'm going to fight back for everyone else who has been victimized. And that means you put yourself in the situation that you were in over and over and over again,
you. Yeah, that's true. And
which is very hard.
I estimate that there's at least 75,000 Americans who had been in the Moonies 6 months or longer. And I think there's maybe 10, 20 that are public about it, willing to share their experiences. Where are the rest of those folks?
Well, they're in shame
Yeah.
or denial,
Yeah, or they
or they don't want a spotlight on them.
yeah. Or they got into another cult, or they got into a alcohol or drug abuse situation, or any
Right?
number of other.
There is a percentage of the population that can't be saved.
Mm,
I'm sorry to say that, but we have to recognize facts. They, for whatever reason or reasons, they are so needy
mm.
that they need to be controlled in a sense. Somebody once said something, and I don't remember the author, but it's so charming to me.
Mm.
Everybody is an atom trying to become a molecule. And it talks about our desire for group.
Yeah.
We need to have um, a realization that we are in fact tribal.
Yeah.
Loneliness is one of the most awful things in the world, as psychologists have shown. Um, and so we we prosper from interaction with others of our species.
Yeah.
Um, and so we're driven to other people.
Yes. And we're
And
dependent on authority figures we believe are legitimate and
right,
media that we think is trustworthy and peer groups that we identify with.
we also, I think, identify with criminals if they are physical or violent, in the sense that not only we want to be them, but we can identify them that way.
Mm-hmm.
Charmers,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the people who speak very well
Con
and
artists.
convincingly, con artists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was thinking of P.T. Barnum, who was maybe the most well known of them 100 years ago.
Yeah, there's a sucker born every minute.
Sucker born every minute,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very sad when you think that members of your species exist solely to prey on the rest of us, because what they do is they deprive the rest of us of humanity. We then distrust.
Yes.
They destroy the very reasons people, I think, were created.
Mm. Yeah, these malignant narcissists seem to be a small percentage of the population, but they do a disproportionate amount of damage.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, it's sad, but we've come a long way. I think I remember that you couldn't even use the word cult because nobody knew what you were talking about.
Yes.
And in fact, the whole history of what we have been talking about has been the search for the right words.
And the right stories.
Yes, I mean, because you can't use brainwashing in the courts. The judges say there's no such thing as brainwashing, or
Mm-hmm.
um, and um, you can't talk about any of these things unless you can step into court with a theory. And this is the theory that you can use.
Yeah, I think it was about 10 years ago. You and I did a talk together at an ICSA conference in Montreal. And
Yes,
it was, I think, in that period that you convinced me to start using the term undue influence instead of brainwashing and
yes.
thought reform because it is a legal construct. But that said, um, please give us more wisdom on how you see the current state of affairs. I mean, it looks like there'll be an investigation into the failed insurrection attempt of January 6th with people who are saying, but I was just doing what the president told me, and Roger Stone and Steve Bannon and a whole bunch of other figures. And but then the law is like, nope, you decided to go to DC and invade the Capitol. Any thoughts you want to share?
I think that so far I haven't seen very much discussion of the particular issue I'm going to mention, but I think it's really at the heart of all of this, and that is, of course, who is responsible.
Mm,
Not just in a moral universe, but in a legal universe.
yeah.
Now, you could argue that the people who invaded the Capitol, the insurrectionists, and it was technically an insurrection, um, that they were acting, in their view, under the influence of the president's words.
Yes.
Um, and that would be the same kind of argument that someone in a cult would make. I was acting under the Messiah or the leader's
Sure.
own words. Do you want to hold somebody responsible if they have been mentally manipulated to have a co-pilot in their mind?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we have to assume that people are responsible for themselves and their own choices. And
Except if they're underage or elderly
yes,
with
right.
dementia or something like that.
So, what do you do when the insurrectionists go into court and said we were acting under the influence of the president? And the president says, I didn't instruct them to do anything. They were acting on their own. I bring up one illustration just because I think it's uh, at the center, but I haven't heard it discussed. And that is in the law, a hypnotist will be held responsible for the hypnotized subject's actions if they were a product of the hypnotic encounter. So we don't have that issue if hypnosis is involved. On the other hand, we could argue, given the looseness of the definitions of hypnosis, that the insurrection was a hypnotic type encounter.
And I've watched some videos, Alan, of people who got recruited into QAnon.
Yes.
And it seemed to me, and I'm actually hoping to do some neuroscientific experiments and research on this, but it seemed to me like it was constructed to be mesmerizing or hypnotizing.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So even though it isn't Donald Trump necessarily showing the videos were put out by, in a sense, his administration or members of his coterie of, supporters at the upper levels.
Yes.
And then we can get into Russia, but that's another discussion, right? But can you say a little bit more about your book Trance on Trial and what people need to know about hypnosis? I want to say first that I did a recent very short video saying that I keep hearing uneducated people, some authority figure types in psychology, saying you could never be hypnotized to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. What sayest thou?
Well, I'll say that I've heard that too.
Right. But what's true? Because my understanding of hypnosis, and it's been a few decades now, is you can create a frame in someone's mind, like hypnotizing them that they're in a movie, and their role is to be an assassin in the movie. And here's a gun that's a toy gun, but your job is to go up and pull the trigger, in the certain scene and put in some trigger words, etc., and someone will kill somebody.
That actually shows up in declassified MK Ultra documents.
Please say
Uh,
more.
the and Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, which preceded MK Ultra. It's a very complicated question and debated in the hypnosis community.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that we can look at it by using the sim.
Mm-hmm.
We have an influencer, an influencee, what methods were used, what consequences, and so on, and the extent to which somebody is receptive to suggestion is quantifiable.
Mm-hmm.
You can calculate it.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, some people will be very good at resisting things. And maybe the more it affects their moral core, the more they'll resist it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the same exact situation with a different subject, they won't.
Right, but I would argue also if someone had preventive education about hypnosis and how to recognize if somebody's starting to do stuff on you, that person has an edge, a frame to understand what's happening.
Only if you define the situation as a hypnotic one. I mean, one of the things that has happened, in my view,
Yeah.
in our world,
Mm-hmm.
is that undue influence in a way is the air in which we now all breathe. If you move away from the brainwashing literature, the thought reform literature, the psychological studies of coerced confessions and so on,
Mm-hmm.
we have our normal day-to-day activities. And what do they consist of? They consist of um, advertisers, marketers, merchandisers,
Right.
with it through commercials and other ways of communicating with us. I saw recently that there is now a science about writing menus for restaurants, how to make sure you make as much money from what
Right.
you're selling.
Yeah.
And so we are, and of course, since the 50s, particularly the advertising world has been attempting to get our dollars, and
Yeah.
others simply are not satisfied with just our dollars.
Yep. I actually was interviewed for a book called The Culting of Brands, and the
Uh,
theme is that corporations want to understand how cults get people to be loyal, and so they want to create loyal, consumers of their brands.
but this is, you know, a good deal of our life is led outside of our awareness,
Yes.
and we don't want to think that at any given moment we're being influenced, because all we're doing is watching a television show.
Right.
But that show has been carefully constructed,
Yep.
and they don't have courses in marketing and merchandising and advertising.
And
Yep.
I would add cell phones are
Right.
right in our face. We don't even need to be looking at a TV show. Every platform is wired with AI to get your attention. And
If
isn't
you
hypnosis defined as a focusing of attention as opposed to sleep? Isn't there a concentration
It's a
piece?
concentration of attention. What you want to do is to narrow a person's focus, so
Yes.
it's not widescreen.
Right.
It's small
Yeah.
screen, um, and then it'll depend on the skills of the hypnotist.
Right.
You know, there are many cases in which hypnotists are so gifted, they're so eloquent.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear a speech from a politician or somebody else, and it can move you to tears.
Mm-hmm.
We are capable of communicating with each other on ways that affect our inner cores.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't seem to be capable of not taking advantage of that.
Say more.
Well, the people who can affect us that way may do so to give us a richer life,
Mm-hmm.
or to take the riches away from our life, often without us knowing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of my therapy work with former cult members isn't. I say it's your mind, you need to control it. I can share with you what I've learned, but it's up to you to have an internal locus of control for your body, for your mind, for your life.
That touches on a topic that I think is particularly fascinating. Um, there is a certain responsibility which comes with being the owner of your own mind.
Agreed?
And people flee that responsibility, maybe not fully consciously,
Hmm.
but they certainly flee it in ways that they might not otherwise recognize as such. But we might. I mean, an easy example, I suspect, is why for many years, whatever the fashion designers were doing in France told women around the world how long or short the skirts would be, what colors were in for that year, and so on.
Right?
Now that's a form of mind contact it may or may not be manipulative depending upon how you see it. But what it does show is the need for us to be in herds.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go with the example of going to a restaurant with friends and saying, "What are you having?" "Oh, I'll have that," as a way of like not choosing for oneself. I thought you were going to go there.
No, I'm actually going to go to Stanford University,
Uh-huh.
where there was what was called VALS, VALS,
Mm-hmm.
Values in American Lifestyles study, a
Okay.
long time ago. And what was fascinating to me about it was that there, at the top, were the ultra rich, and they didn't need anybody or anything. They had the ability to buy anything they wanted. And so they could easily be manipulated also, as many of them are. Um, but they had their own way of living apart from society. At the bottom were the people who are homeless, uh, who are in low paying or almost no paying jobs and so on. They have to concentrate all their time on survival.
Yeah.
In the middle, you have the herd.
Mm.
And those are the people who can be influenced. And the Values in American Lifestyles study showed who those people were and how easily they can be influenced.
Hmm.
So hypnosis is a concentrated methodology of influence, but we swim in a sea of suggestion, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, and no message comes to us without something requiring us to think or make decisions.
Yes.
Remember a long time ago, I think it was Coca Cola, um, ran a long advertising campaign about drinking Coke to be sociable.
I don't remember that,
Uh,
but
And that was very effective
mm-hmm.
because people wanted to be part of the herd.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing, but it's a bad thing when you do it only because you think that's what you need to do to become part of the herd.
Like wear a particular colored hat, for example, or clothing,
Yes, yes,
or otherwise fads of things. Tattoos are in. Everybody seems to be
that's
getting
right.
a
That,
tattoo.
that's
Why?
a good illustration. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. So,
more
Alan,
hair. People in the 60s got criticized for having long hair.
hmm,
Uh, Towards the 80s, people went more towards military cuts.
yeah.
And so even something like that identifies you with a group.
Yes.
And that, of course, becomes a signal for influencers what strategy to influence you is likely to work based on the choices that you already have made,
Yeah.
and not aware that it was a choice involving a potential manipulation.
Yeah. Part of what's so scary to me now in the time that we're living is the how much people spend time online and all of the accumulation of data of our preferences of what we like, what we don't like, what we search for is being aggregated in the cloud and then collected by third party entities to sell for whether or not they want your vote or they want you to show up at a rally or whatever. And AI is now being crafted with algorithms to understand exactly what sequence of buttons to push. You were talking about
Right.
grooming as an incremental thing.
Yes, right.
It's going online and it's affecting masses of people.
Yes, and you can trace that trend through the 20th now into the 21st century.
Hmm. So we're going to need to wrap up soon, but coming back to the slippery slope argument that I keep hearing that you can't tell if there's undue influence because one person's cult is another person's religion. I take the position a legitimate religion needs to give informed consent. You need to not be lied to, and you need to know what it is you're being asked to believe, what's going to happen. Like if you're in the JWs, you're not going to be able to take a blood transfusion if you have a car accident and you're bleeding, or that
Well,
you'll be kicked out
well,
for celebrating a birthday of somebody who's not even a member.
this is going to be the issue um, now for the legal system, and the spearhead is going to be abortion.
Say more.
Well, it is true that the United Nations and the United States and countries around the world have recognized freedom of religion.
Yes.
It's not so clear what actually is a religion,
Right.
which is why we saw so many sprout up.
Oh, I
Um,
had a revelation. God told me to start the Church of Steve Hassan. No, just kidding. Go on.
no, right, but that's
Right.
for many people that was a reality.
Right.
That's what they did. Religion is a whole different animal, much harder to talk about because people are much more devoted
Mm,
to their religion, and almost anything you say that sounds like it's against religion will be harmful and ineffective. Um, so I don't want to talk about religion other than peripherally,
hmm
which is to say that religion in our society is given a pass. You can do a lot of things under the name of religion that you would not otherwise be able to do.
Exactly.
And people are okay with that in ways they would not be okay if it were private groups doing it.
Except the Catholic Church priests sexually molesting children was not a pass.
I was involved in a lot of those cases. A lot. For me, not the thousands and thousands and thousands that have occurred,
Yeah.
but I've testified in some, and I've written about those cases, and it was clear from certain state courts that priests were able to do things that if a psychologist or a therapist did, they would be punished for.
I see.
Exact same kind of things. Religion is given a certain transcendental pass,
Hmm.
and that complicates the equation. And it's why a lot of the original cult leaders were based in some religion that they created or
Like
uh,
Hubbard decided to start a religion.
right, exactly.
Hmm
Because you get more power that way. Um,
Yeah.
but when I think about religion, I wonder about the other questions, and that is if you belong to a particular religion, are you discounting people all over the world who have other religions? So
That's
the
a very
Middle East,
important question, actually, because there
because
are groups that are ecumenical and say you have a right to believe your way, but then there are these authoritarian groups that basically look at everyone else as part of Satan's world or whatever, and therefore you can do anything to them, including kill them.
that's right. But and I'm thinking in kind of more global terms. There are people who grew up uh, knowing nothing about Christianity because they lived in the Middle East and so on. There are people in the West who know nothing about Eastern religions.
Right.
Why is the God you grew up with in your country more important than the God that other people grew up with in their countries?
hmm
And since researchers tell us that most wars have been fought in the name of religion,
Mm.
this is one of the most serious questions of them all.
Hmm.
because it means we are doomed to fight each other forever unless the entire world believes in the same God. And that won't work because you can be a Christian but have many different denominations of Christianity, from ultra orthodox to
Right.
more benign.
Right.
Um, and so, are we hardwired to just want to eliminate each other? And if we are, then let's try to not help the process along.
Yeah, I that's one area I still cling to my idealism and my desire to believe that essentially people are good and to be aspirational in my communications to people to rise up, that they can get out of authoritarian things, that they can learn.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying anything against that. Um,
Right. Right. It's great. Alan,
all
we're
I'm
going to
saying is,
need to wrap up now, but I'm so grateful to you. Let's do more of these. Every time we talk, I learn something new, and I'm so grateful that you have been my guide, and you've also someone that I've gone to when cults have threatened me and, complaints against me, and you've given me sage pro bono advice. So I'm very grateful to
well, I
that and
think,
your friendship.
and same with you. I mean, I think it's been a non-exploitative, mutually beneficial relationship where we've made each other better people and wiser people.
Yeah, definitely benevolent. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
and we'll be talking soon.
That would be my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.